Hi, my name is John Wright. This is my History of Art Assignment 2, Task 2, submitted on Monday the 12th of January 2015.
Art has been a part of our culture from the beginning of creation. Evidence of this can be seen from prehistoric artworks found all over the globe. This was when art was not just a pastime but a way for man to prove that it was really there. As mankind grew more intelligent and began to build great structures, a classical style arose out of the dust, and it can still be seen today in such foundations that contain arches and pillars. They all owe their creation to the classical movement. As the structures became more grand, a Gothic style arose, with grand archways and decorative dark designs. These designs can still be seen throughout the world in most historical churches and cathedrals, such as the Notre Dame de Paris. The most renowned art period is known as the Renaissance. This was a time in Europe when art flourished, when the most well-known artists of the world were alive. This movement consisted of neoclassicism, romanticism, impressionism, post-impressionism, and many others. The styles consisted of the fine, nearly pointillism style of impressionism, the broader strokes of post-impressionism, or reverse of that, and the fine classical art of neoclassicism. There are also more recent movements known as Art Deco and Art Nouveau. These two styles could not be more different to each other, with Art Deco being solid colour, straight lines representing technology, the modern world, and what else have you. Whereas Art Nouveau is curved lines, blended colour, showing the beauty of nature and the beauty of the feminine form. Next came the Falsism and Expressionism. Both of these movements were how artists showed their true feelings about how they saw the world. Through bright colours and scary, drastic images, most of these artists all fell into madness during their lives. Through Cubism artists, we look at the world in a completely different way. They take pieces of other objects and mash them together, and it was just amazing what they did. This could be viewed as a form of early 3D or three-dimensional art. Then came futurism. It took the same stance but was inspired by war, and its artwork reflected this. Next came the very confusing style of Die Still. Solid lines and pure colour was its focus. It focused mainly on the object's form instead of looking at its style. Dada and Surrealism were the beginnings of the photomanipulated art we can see today. They promoted shock tactics, which we can also see in Brit art. They were random and were mainly just to make people stop and look and think. From the West, pop art came in. Its cartoonish styles and bright colours were a pleasing sight to the eyes, compared to that of the previous art. Styles we see today are that of optical art and hyperrealism, where the art looks so real you could swear it was a photography picture, or it looks so 3D that you swear it could jump off the page right at you. Now, let's get on to my main topic of discussion, retrofuturism. Retrofuturism is an art movement where artists take ideas of the possible future technologies and create them in the current technology available in that style, now viewed in today's opinion as retro. Retrofuturism began in the late 1960s and 1970s. It was inspired by the fast-paced advances in technologies such as the first personal computer and the birth of the first test tube baby. As the movement grew, it inspired other movements and became more and more popular. Some of the movements are well known in science fiction to date, movements such as retrotronics, neo-futurism, steampunk, dieselpunk, and PVC clothing. With today's media being as it is no shock that retrofuturism has some say in its creation. Video games and movies come out all the time. Some video games such as Alien Isolation, Bioshock, Crimson Skies, Dishonored, Fallout, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, the Resistance series, Team Fortress 2, Wolfenstein The New Order, Wasteland 2, and Call of Duty Black Ops 2 Nuketown 2025. All of these have some form of inspiration from retrofuturism or one of the movements or movies such as Men in Black, John Carter, X-Men First Class, Flash Gordon, Captain America, Iron Giant, Back to the Future, Snowpiercer, Tron, and the world-famous Star Wars trilogy. But it wasn't just in media that retrofuturism made its stamp on the world. It also inspired great structures throughout the world, like the Los Angeles International Airport, the TWA Terminal in New York City, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, or the tessellated glass roof of the British Museum in the Great Court. Now, let's take a look at how art has changed over the many years. We can see how the artists thought the world was going to look like in the far future, how the artists thought we were going to live in a lap of luxury, how they thought technology was going to advance and keep advancing, and structures were going to get more and more exotic. The artists of today's society are a bit more realistic, but the arts of the past still have the same hope for technology and advancement as they did back then. But because of all the movies and video games inspired by that movement, the past creations have become a bit more predictable. It doesn't shock us anymore like it used to. Let's take a step back and look at some of the video games that retrofuturism has inspired, like Call of Duty Black Ops 2 Nuketown 2025. This map has somewhat advanced technologies in it, like the futuristic houses, the futuristic structures in the background, the sci-fi looking vehicles, but let's take a closer look. As you can see, some of these buildings are similar to that of the American home back in 1970. Except for the major technology advances, not much seems to have changed. They are still very retro looking. If you even look at the cars, they have the same shape that they did back then. For example, those that are bright blue, what you can see down in the very front, same shape, only it's been modified for space travel. It is still the same shape. If you look closer, there are even mannequins dressed up in 70s style clothing, even though the year is 2020. Next up is the video game series Fallout. From the video game's earliest days of inspiration, the game was obviously inspired by the likes of Retrotronics and the like, but let's just take a little look. The game's main loading screen, you can see main inspirations by Retrotronics in the trends that come out of retrofuturism. Signs of such would be the vacuum tube light bulbs or the Nixel display, where the two key features of the Retrotronics era, or the Retrotronics style as it were. Others being relays, uniselectors and analog meters. All of these could be linked to Retrotronics, old technologies. When the game became a first-person character, you could actually see the characters close up, and whenever you look at the very front box, the character has a very, very retro gas mask style and an old World War I uniform. These are mimicked in the game. When you look at the way the character is designed, you can see a very steampunk or dieselpunk way of design around them. And now we come to their weapon designs. While the game itself is set in a very primitive fashion, the weapons match this even though they are in a futuristic style. They could also be argued to be slightly retro as this style goes. Now we come to the final video game I'm going to mention, Dishonored. We get right into the character stylings here, and such. Looking how the character is dressed, we can see a sense of steampunk coming out as far as the clothes go, and the mask is more easily identifiable as Retrotronics or Dieselpunk with the metal and glass irises on it. A closer look at his weapon, it's quite primitive, but to be designed like it is in the style of Steam and Dieselpunk, it makes it quite appealing to modelers such as myself, who would have a pleasure designing and modelling this weapon. Another piece of concept art drawn for this game, again you can see how the designers were influenced by the likes of sci-fi stories, and the styling mimics some of those read from the War of the Worlds and others like it, while the actual aesthetics and game and design of it show a more human feel to it, though a lack of construction restrictions, however, have a glimmer of Dieselpunk in the style. Now onto the movies. Here we can see a shot from Flash Gordon, where a glider is entering a very futuristic building. Both objects are completely metal, which is considered a sign of steampunk inspiration. And then the design of the building is also very retro, reminding me of one of the larger buildings in the city built in the style of Art Deco. The doorway, if you look, has slight juts at the very top, which reminds me of the sun's rays, which are a very familiar sign in the era of Art Deco. If you look at the actual vehicle itself, you can see pipes coming out the back, which is another show of steampunk, and while it may be considered sci-fi, it's more steampunk and diesel. Men in Black. Now, most would call this as a sci-fi movie, but in all retrospect, every sci-fi movie, intentional or not, has something that can be linked to futurism in this way. The weapons have a very retro feel about them, others are just completely steampunk inspired. The flying rocket car, that has definite roots in retrofuturism. Every piece of sci-fi art from that era can be seen as some form of flying vehicle. That was man's dream, to fly. Now let's take a look at the Total Recall movie remake that happened a few years back. On the left we have an example of some retrofuturism city art drawn back in its era. On the left we have a picture of some concept art drawn from the movie Total Recall. So there are some similarities that stick out whenever you look at the two. The very tall buildings, the roads going in between them, for example. Here they are again. Tall buildings, roads just like them drawn in a retrofuturistic style. And now for the final image of the movie. Here to sums it all up, you can clearly see flying cars, just like the retrofuturism artists drew. We can also see roads above the buildings, and just to tie it in with a little bit of steampunk, you can also see elements that are all mixed in from every era of art, every era of time, so it looks like they're still living in poverty. So that's what steampunk is, basically, in the fact, old clothing mixed in a more futuristic style. In comparison to my own work, myself being a 3D modeler with graphic design on the side, I tend to follow the stylings more of retrofuturism in the more modern sci-fi aspects. I took some inspiration from the newest Men in Black movie. The one-wheel vehicle that they ride particularly caught my interest. I tried to design something along the same style, more modern and less metallic, but it's still an ongoing project and is yet to be refined. For a final mention here is a model of a sci-fi pistol that I designed, looking at some of their weapons. Again, it's still a work in progress, but I looked at most all weapons from their movie to get some concept. Granted, I might have kept it with a straight metallic instead of adding colour into it, but perhaps if I changed it to a rough metal scratch pattern with a grey overlay, it would suit more of the style I was going for. Thank you for listening.